hope you guys aren't sick of talking about AI, because we got more. That's like just the very tip of the iceberg, so be ready for that. And I'm also realizing that if we're going to talk about things like AI, we're going to need longer panel times because we're all going over, because there's so much to unpack. But our next panel is going to be more about the startup scene here in Europe. And without any further ado, I'm going to bring up the man who's going to tell us all about it. Please welcome to the stage Niklas Zennström from Atomico and our moderator, Connie Loizos.
Good morning, everyone. Everyone here knows that Niklas is exceptional in many ways. Among other things, he founded the venture firm Atomico. He co-founded the online calling company Skype and sold it twice. He's a professional sailor, an active philanthropist, and a very enthusiastic spokesman for the European tech scene. And in fact, you're the president, aren't you, of the European Tech Alliance?
Yes.
That's great. Well, I have to say, my family uses Skype regularly still, and my sons are very excited that I'm talking with you today. So thank you for helping burnish my credibility with them.
Great to be here.
There's a lot to talk about today, obviously. Brexit, of course. There's also fast evolving European tech scene, and that was sort of made manifest last week. Atomico put together a report that many of you may have seen. They surveyed 1,500 investors, founders, employees, to create sort of a snapshot of what's going on in Europe. And one of the most interesting things that I thought came out of the report was just these sort of deep tech centers. And it seems like the UK especially is sort of a nexus for that. Can you sort of talk about what you mean by deep tech to start off with?
Sure. I mean, you had two deep tech companies on stage earlier with Darktrace and DeepMind. They're great examples of what we mean with deep tech, and also the level of deep tech that we see today. So basically, it's companies using kind of AI, machine learning, robotics, VR, AR, IoT. So basically, companies which are a bit more innovative in the technology rather than let's make a website or let's make an app. So it's not really it's a little bit fuzzy, but there's very, very clear trend. And what we think that over the next 10 years, the most defining technology will be machine learning, artificial intelligence. And that's why we're so excited that Europe is so well ahead in AI, and specifically UK is really, really on the forefront of machine learning AI. A lot of the scientists in the field is coming from here. And what we also see now is that it's a new wave of deep tech companies coming out of a lot of places in Europe. And I think there's a little bit of a DeepMind effect where you always need this in the ecosystems where you need a breakthrough company that is then showing other entrepreneurs, and maybe in this case other scientists.
Right.
Wow, we can also build this kind of companies. So you have a lot of new type of machine learning companies that are specifically in that. But the other thing that you're also seeing today is that more and more of companies are thinking about how they can apply machine learning in their businesses. So this is a clear trend that we're seeing across Europe. Many more of these companies, but also there's also no more M&A activities in deep tech companies. You have a lot of the big US companies, some of the Asian companies, and also some of the European corporates which are acquiring some of these deep tech companies.
Right. So that's obviously a lot of inspiration for scholars and academics to get into the business in a way that they might not have before. I also think it's interesting because I feel like there's wrongly this impression on the part of maybe American founders, or maybe it's the press, that European founders are somehow less ambitious. Do you feel like that's been? I mean, obviously you would disagree that that's the case.
No, well, I think you need to put it in perspective. And Silicon Valley has existed for 40, 50 years. There's been success, and success breeds success. The more success you have in an ecosystem, the higher the ambition level. Back in 2001, 2002, was pretty brave to even start a company here because no one thought that it could work. Everyone then thought you needed to be in Silicon Valley to build a company. So I think over the last 15 years, the ambition level is getting bigger and bigger. And that's also where you see companies now which are really building global category winners, companies like Supercell, Spotify, and some of the others. So it's like, well, they're global companies. It's very, very high ambition level. And those are giving inspiration for other entrepreneurs to think, have bigger ambition. 10 years ago, it was about building national companies. You built a company in Germany, you built a Swedish company, a British company. We see less of that today. Today is much more building international companies. So the ambition level is really getting up.
Right.
And you're also starting, what I'm excited about personally is also the ambition to take on some of the really big challenges and some of the big problems we have in the world, because we are consuming 1.5 times the resources of our planet. We live in completely unsustainable. And these are some of the big challenges that only entrepreneurs and innovators can solve.
Right, and we were talking about a company earlier that you just funded that sounds terribly interesting, Lilium Aviation out of Munich.
Yes.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So this is one of the maybe a really good example of founders who are using deep technology, taking a very big problem. So the thesis here is that the way we deal with transportation today is broken. We are congestions to get from East London to West London takes forever, and we have pollutions in our cities. We are emitting too much carbon dioxide, so we get climate change. We're wasting time in car jams. So of course you have electrical vehicles, autonomous vehicles going to deal with some of those things, but really to solve it in a big ways, we think that you need to take to the skies. So what Lilium is doing is developing a vertical takeoff and landing electrical airplane that is capable of intercity and metropolitan area transportation. And because it's electrical, it's very quiet, so you can come in and land in city centers.
It's sort of like a flying car, essentially, or is that taking a little
of course,
too far?
it's more like, we think about Jetsons, right?
Right.
But it's not a flying car because it doesn't drive as a car, but it's kind of the size of a car, but it takes off vertical and electrically. Vertical and then it can fly as an airplane.
So at what range? It flies at how far off the ground?
It can go maybe 3,000 meters. So it flies away above, so you don't really see it, and you will not hear it when it's up there. So you will only kind of see and hear it when it just takes off.
Okay.
And then it transitions to flight mode.
Okay. So this is so interesting. I don't know if maybe some of you caught, there was an interview with Mark Andreessen, the American venture capitalist, in an outlet called The Verge last week, and he was talking about how flying cars are probably closer than anyone thinks. He made a couple of observations, which I'll get to, but Lilium is not the first to do this. So I'm wondering, I know there's an American company in Massachusetts, Terrafugia, I think you pronounce it. There's one in Slovakia, maybe, Air Mobile. Can you talk a little bit about how this one is different?
Sure. So there are a few companies addressing this problem or this opportunity with different technological concepts, and I think there's always what you will see when there is a market that being built up, and there's technological capabilities that makes it happen. And in this case, it's like the maturity or the capacity of batteries are right now at a tipping point, so this is possible. So you have different companies coming from different waypoints, or from different points of views. What we have seen, though, when we look, because this is when we make an investment, we will always kind of look for these bigger themes. We do a due diligence. We look at all the companies around the world, and we'd like to pick the company which we think is the potentially category winner. We like to invest in these companies early on, like in a Series A, so we can really help them to scale. Right. So in this case, what's different with Lilium compared to many others, a lot of the others are kind of have, taking the concept of a drone and making it really big. So when you have so you have your personal drone. The problem with a drone is that the propellers have to create lifts all the time, so it's going to use a lot of electricity. But Lilium, it's just using need to create thrust to get it up, and then it transitions to a flight mode. With the wings, it's using much less energy. Actually, it's using about the same energy as an electrical car.
That's
extremely energy efficient.
So it's not relying on this breakthrough of battery technology that.
Well, it gives it more range. So all these so if you have those kind of personal drones, they have a very, very short range and not very, very fast. And then you have some others which are trying to do some more hybrids where you have big rotors that are tilting, which make them they become just bigger. Need bigger space for landing.
Okay.
So there are different concepts, and this is always great with technology because you have different innovators taking on different ways, and then one of these going to be transformational.
Last question related to this. Does this company sort of see a day when these will be self-piloting versus having humans drive them, fly them?
So this is another kind of factor where we think that the trends are in your favor. So initially we believe that, well, for sure it will be pilot-driven, although it will be highly automated. So if you fly a plane today, you control, the flaps and everything manually. Well, this is much more of a joystick. Like you want to go left, you want to go right, you want to go up, or you want to go, down. And so it's very simple to fly.
Okay.
Eventually, this is going to be autonomous, but it doesn't rely on that. You want to remove kind of risk factors. So like it's perfectly viable as a model, even if they would be forever pilot-driven. But we can see clearly a path to autonomous, because the reality is it's easier to have an autonomous vertical takeoff and landing aircraft than a autonomous car, because you don't have children jumping out in the air or cats jumping in front of you.
Right. And when is this going to be ready? So it's going into, there are going to be some sort of like pilot operations next year, and then when will it be?
So the company was founded 2 years ago, and they have been testing their prototype. So they've already been flying a scaled down version of the prototype, and they're now getting ready for a test flight of the full-scale prototype early next year.
Wow.
And then, of course, they will get a lot of input and feedback for the further development. With these very highly, advanced technologies, it's really hard to say this is exactly the date it's going to be out. So the company decided they're not going to, they haven't set a specific launch date, but it's some time out.
Well, we could talk all day about this. I mean, including about regulatory issues, but we'll move on. I'm fascinated. Let's go back to your report, which I thought was so interesting. Another thing that you mentioned was that's changing the tech scene here is new forms of capital that are coming in. And you talked a little bit about corporate VCs. You talked, I think, a little bit about maybe pension funds who you are sort of hoping will increasingly allocate more of their assets to the venture scene. Tell me what's been happening.
So on the bigger picture, you can say that on the earlier first of all, there have been more and more capital invested in Europe. It's, I think, over the last 4 years or 5 years, it's about 4 times as much capital per year being invested. So it's very, very healthy. On the earlier stage, like seed, Series A, is really good. It's almost kind of, if you compare to the US, it's pretty much almost on par with the US in terms of, if you look at the number of companies and the amount of capital. So you have a lot of new breed of seed and early stage VCs, where people who are being founders or operators are doing that, which is fantastic, because we always believe that founders are better to give mentorship than other founders. Then when it comes to like later stages, Series B and later, there's still a funding gap, where US has 14 times more capital.
14 times?
14, 1-4. Which is, by the way, a problem. Too much capital in the US has been pushing prices up.
Right.
When US companies go public, they have too high multiples, they're struggling. European companies, when they go public, not crazy multiples, actually been going really well after IPOs. So there need to be a correction there. So when we looked at this, the data, it turns out that if the European pension funds would allocate just 0.6% of their assets into venture, you would fill that funding gap.
That's great, but I mean, on the other hand, it sounds like you're saying it's healthy comparatively. I mean, there is too much funding happening in Silicon Valley, and to your point, there have been a lot of new, KKR raised like a $3.7 billion European fund, DST. TCV, who I'm talking to on stage, has invested something like 700 million in recent years. Do you feel like for the opportunity set, also I think the exits here are not quite as rich, which is okay, but so I'm just wondering, you obviously don't want to run into the same problem we have where there's an oversupply of capital.
There's always a lag of institutional capital. Because this was happening now here in Europe. It's just the last few years been an explosion of companies, getting better and better, more smart people. Some of the best students are going into technology instead of Morgan Stanley or Goldman Sachs or McKinsey and so forth.
Right.
So it takes longer time for institutional finance to react to this, but they're going in the right direction. I mean, we can see already now there's quite a few of the large pension funds, some of the Swedish pension funds are really woken up. So it's everything is going in the right direction. But the other thing also that we've seen is that corporates have been woken up as well. And I think when I speak to both CEOs, but maybe also more with the people who are behind the companies, the families who own these companies, because a lot of the very successful companies in Europe are family owned. They may be on the public market, but they have usually a very strong family ownership, and they think long term. So they understand more and more today that there is a transformation happening, that everything will become digitized. So they're thinking about how can we deal with this transition that's going to happen in the next 10 years. So that's why they're getting more and more involved with technology, either doing direct investments or acquiring companies, partnering with companies, or investing in venture capital funds.
That's interesting. They've already sort of skipped a step and they're making direct co-investments, which we're also seeing in the U.S. Another aspect of the report that I wanted to bring up was the hubs that are sort of springing up everywhere. You mentioned that Paris, for example, raised maybe more money than
Germany.
Yes. And Lisbon, and you mentioned a number of centers. I thought that was interesting. I guess that sort of speaks to your point about academics coming out and starting companies. But I wonder, as it relates to Brexit, if this gap between London's lead over these other hubs is going to be lessened, and if that matters, do you care personally?
Yeah. So, two different things here. One thing is that there are more and more tech hubs being developed. A few years ago, we thought that is really kind of London, Berlin, Stockholm. Everything concentrates around these hubs. They get critical mass and they absorb more people. But what we've seen in our report over the last year is that we have a lot of new hubs. And as you said, so France had more venture capital investments than Germany last year. So Paris is really challenging. But then we see places like Munich, where Lilium is from. We say Zurich, which has, ETH is one of the best technical universities in the world. Really good companies. We see places like Madrid and Lisbon, and of course Finland. So there are more places. The trend is kind of spreading. So technology entrepreneurships have become contagious, and it's out there, which is fantastic. Now, then the other thing is about, okay, how will kind of UK and London hold up in a post-Brexit world?
Right.
And this is something that is, my view is that it's probably irrelevant because you have entrepreneurs who are coming up with a great idea to start something. They're not going to say, well, gee, I'm not going to do this because UK is not going to be part of European Union. I don't think that's going to happen. Because
they might not say they won't do it, but maybe they'll say, maybe I won't do it in the UK.
No, but yes, but so there you have two things. What I did in 2002 when I started Skype, I launched Skype in Sweden, but then I said, I wanted to stay in Europe, by the way, because we had a fantastic tech team here, and for other reasons. Then I decided London is the best place in Europe to launch a global company. And I thought, by the way, I still think so. Because it's just London is really the global hub of Europe. There is so much happening here, so much capital, and people fly in and out everywhere. So, in a post-Brexit world, whatever is going to happen, in our research that we did, the study that we launched last week, we asked people if you would move to a place, what's the most important to start a company? What's the most important thing? And number one is always access to talent. And then you have capital somewhere in markets. But talent is the most important thing. So there's a lot of very, very good talent in the UK. Now, what the UK government need to make sure is that whatever happens, is that they need to make sure that companies, tech companies here in the UK have access to the best talent in the world. And when I say best talent in the world, I'm not saying the best talent in EU. I think that if they make sure that we can hire people from all over the world who are talented without a lot of red tape, I think UK is going to be just fine.
We're pretty much out of time. I did want to ask you quickly. I do think of you as more than an entrepreneur or a venture capitalist. Like I said early on, you're sort of this real advocate for the tech scene here. What do you want your legacy to be in the startup community? I mean, is that something that you think about?
It's a bit too early for that. No, but you know, my passion is really to help to build you know these entrepreneurial environments and ecosystems. And I was always very frustrated when people told me, back when I was trying to build my businesses, like, oh, but you know, you shouldn't do it. You know, it's too risky, and why don't you take a job? But you know, if you want to start something, you need to go to Silicon Valley. You know, like, you know, this is something we can do everywhere. Right. And the reason why I think it's important is not just to prove a point, but in order to you know, we have some big challenges, right? So we have economical, financial challenges clearly here in Europe and other places as well. And we have all the industries which are not really growing. So if you want to have economical growth, you need to create an environment for entrepreneurs, innovative entrepreneurs, to flourish. That is the kind of the one, almost the, you know, the one way to really get growth.
Right.
So I want to be helpful with that. But the other thing, which is maybe more important, is that we have all these global challenges. So, you know, look at these 17 global sustainability goals that UN put out. These are big, big, big problems. And I have I don't believe, I've been dealing a lot with politicians to understand that they are not the change makers. They are reacting to what others are doing.
Right.
The change makers are the entrepreneurs. They're the ones that can make it happen. So innovative entrepreneurs who are taking on some of these bigger and bolder problems to have an impact. Those are the ones I want to support, and I want to help them to be successful, because that's where we can really make a difference.
Right.
And we see that with companies like, can you hear me?
I'm not sure if it's still working.
Okay, companies like, no? That's it.
Oh, thank you.
So you see that, you know, companies already this morning, companies like DeepMind and you know, and others are actually taking on some of these big challenges. And that's something I want to, you know, participate and help with. And I think that's something that, you know, whether it's, you know, we as Atomico, investing in these companies really early on and taking on some risk, you know, coming in Series A, helping them to really scale their business. That's something that I'm getting excited about.
That's great. Well, the European tech community is so lucky to have you, and thank you for coming. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, sure.
Thanks, everybody.